In today's episode of Daily OSC Theory, we have the theory of what makes an object show great. This is kind of one of those more broader theories within the OSC, and in this video we're going to be explaining basically what can make an object show great. Is because it's not just the animation and the voice acting and the visual appeal of the show, it's more of actually how it's written. In fact, there's a lot of object shows that might not look the best visually appealing or the most visually appealing, but still has an amazing story. You know what I mean? You could think of shows like Towels or PB&GB, that kind of stuff, right? Those shows are widely respected and liked in the object show community for a good reason, is because they're made very well. But, you know what I mean, they might not be the most visually appealing object shows. They might not have the best assets or the best backgrounds or the best voice acting or whatever. But the story is still good and it's written well in a nice way and it's polished, right? You know what I mean? You can tell that the creators of these shows put a lot of effort into these episodes and they made it well. And this is not to say that, the voice acting, animation, or, backgrounds, all that stuff isn't good. In fact, they are pretty good within these shows. You know what I mean? But a show doesn't have to have the best, the show doesn't have, an object show doesn't have to be the best visually appealing, but it can also be good because of its story and how it's made. So, yeah, in this video, we're going to be just discussing that. If you enjoy OSC theories about object shows, video essays about object shows, consider subscribing to the channel. I post videos like this a couple times a week. But yeah, let's just go ahead and get into it. Now, when you're coming up with a story for an object show, it doesn't have to be some kind of humongous lore dump kind of thing, even though that's kind of what my series is going to be about. But you don't have to do that. In fact, your show doesn't have to have a super interesting plot, but you can kind of develop the plot as the show goes along. Or it can just be a silly, lighthearted show and have each episode have its own individual plot. Not every show has to be leading up to something big, but it's kind of how you make these episodes and the story behind these episodes that really makes the series good. Like, for an example, you know what I mean, PB&GB is one of those object shows that might not be building up to something massive, but still, at the same time, it's a good show, is because each individual episode has its own plot, you know what I mean? It has its own kind of sentiment around it. Kind of like not object shows, but kind of like series from the 2010s. You know what I mean? You could take example shows like, maybe shows like, I wouldn't say like 2010s probably for this show, like maybe like SpongeBob or something like that. Like in those episodes, right? There's not, for the series itself, there's nothing, it's not building up to anything huge. I'm talking about SpongeBob in its prime, not the current one. But, the episodes weren't building up to any, or the series wasn't building up to anything huge, right? It was just, each episode had its own individual plot where the characters would be doing something, you know what I mean? And there's kind of a message or theme behind the episode. You get what I mean? That might have been, that might not have been, the best example, but I know there's a lot of other shows out there like that. It's not just limited to just object shows. Like I said, PB&GB is one of those shows where it's not really building up to anything huge at the end of the series, but, at the same time, there's, each episode has its own plot. I think there's actually been reviews made about this show. I'll try to link some in the description so you can kind of get a better understanding on the series itself. But, there's shows like that, and there's other object shows where the story is leading up to something big. Object shows like Inanimate Insanity in 1, created by both Animation Epic and Cheesy HFJ respectively, these series were building up to something big the entire time. You know what I mean? For an example, yeah, each individual episode kind of did have their own little, storyline and mini plot in it, but the series itself was building up to something big. Especially stuff like, Inanimate Insanity Season 2 and, the entire series of 1. These shows were created. This is kind of a little bit speculative for Inanimate Insanity, is because when the series was first made, when Inanimate Insanity was first made, you would not think that the show had an actual plot. I don't know if Adam was planning this since the very beginning, but he might have been planning it since he created season 2. I don't know. But, yeah, like I said, with these shows, it is building up to something big. You know what I mean? Animatic Battle is kind of in a tough spot. I don't really know. You know what I mean? The series might go into the backstory of Animatic as a character, but it might not. Who knows? That's kind of more of a theory thing that you can kind of theorize about. When it comes to BFDI seasons, it's also kind of tricky as well, is because there's not a plot, there's not the series the series isn't building up to something big, but it still has lore. You know what I mean? It's one of those shows where it has a lot of lore and stuff like that within it, but it's not really building up to anything huge. There's no big bad villain that the contestants are trying to beat. Unless you're a master BFDI theorizer and you came up with the idea that an announcer was trying to completely destroy the show, and that's what every season is leading up to. That definitely isn't me. I definitely didn't make a video about that you should definitely go check out, but that's a story for another day. But still, though, in the broader scale of the series, it's not building up to anything huge. It's just kind of, there's lore behind it. There's questions that can be answered, or there's things that can be theorized about within the series, but there isn't something huge that everything is building up to. You know what I mean? And there's object shows that kind of fall somewhere in the middle, and I think that's kind of where most object shows end up being at. But you know what I mean? There's also a lot of other ones that might be actually building up to something big, or there might be object shows, like I said before, that are kind of in the middle of it. With a show like Towels, you can kind of argue that it could be either one, but there's also other object shows as well. I can't, I don't want to say, too many, is because I usually just watch, a random assortment of object shows. I couldn't really tell you myself, but I feel I know that there are a lot of those out there. Now, speaking from personal experience, my object show is one of those shows where it is leading up to something big, but each episode has its own plot. You can think of it as something that's similar to a show like One. Each episode has its own individual kind of storyline to it, but the series is also leading up to something big. It's one of those object shows. And I think that's pretty cool. You know what I mean? I personally enjoy object shows like that. It's because that it's it's leading up to something. You know that something is going to be happening, something massive is going to happen at the end of the series. You don't quite know what, but every episode kind of has a mini plot that is getting you closer and closer to the answer. That was something like One. People kind of theorized about that. People kind of theorized who Eri was before he was actually revealed, and of course, Eri was revealed to be kind of a numbskull, but, that's whatever. Honestly, in my legitimate, honest opinion, I think you can make your object show however you want it to be. You know what I mean? Most people, at least, in the current day of in the object show community, kind of prefer more lighthearted and silly object shows. You know what I mean? That's kind of what resonates with a lot of people. And that's cool. I prefer darker object shows, but, you know what I mean? You can have your own opinion. But there's also some people who prefer something a little bit in the middle. I feel like I've seen a couple of people, say that to me, or, comment that in, one of my polls. I think I made a poll where it was, what kind of object show do you prefer? One option was lighthearted and silly object shows, and the other option was darker, more story-based object shows, right? But, and I think and I think a lot of people found some kind of middle ground with that, which I think is pretty cool. So I went back to the post, right? And I think one comment that I kind of agree with is a comment that SilkyBox7772 made, that reads, I really like when shows look all lighthearted but then takes a dark turn. I think that's my favorite object show, or my favorite trope ever. And I can kind of agree. I mean, honestly, and there's another comment that reads, I like it mixed, mostly lighthearted and dark and disturbing if needed. Like for an example, Object Terror, even though everyone hates that object show. Now that first claim I can kind of agree with, like, you know what I mean? When it comes to like I think it'd be pretty cool if like an object show starts out lighthearted, but then takes a bit more of a darker, more disturbing tone to it. I think that's pretty cool. Or there can be object shows that give you a false sense of security. Makes you think that the show is going to be, lighthearted or goofy, but in reality, it's not, right? It's just kind of leading up to something huge. And then you can make the argument that Inanimate Insanity was like this, but it wasn't really all in one season. It's kind of hard to explain, but that's a whole other video. In fact, I actually made a video about Inanimate Insanity. It kind of revolves around the most recent episode, but I think you guys should really go check it out if you want a deeper look into that. But that is all for today's video. If you guys enjoy object show, video essays, or OSC theories about different object shows, consider subscribing to the channel. This has been OSC Historical. I made that name up, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.